Hi folks, the Filipina P here. And a lot of you guys have been asking me if my time in the US has changed my opinion on bringing a Filipina back to the West. After all, culture shock is a real thing. And living in a foreign country will change a person. But in what way? Can a Filipina be transplanted from her own culture into yours without being ruined by modern Western life? Well, if you've ever entertained the idea of bringing your Filipina partner to your home country, this is one video you won't want to miss. I have this nasty habit of sitting down and talking to almost everyone I see and asking point-blank questions about their hopes, their dreams, and their lives. Only a small percentage of it ever makes its way into a video, but rest assured that I never stop. And I'm always collecting information that you can use as well. And after talking to so many Western guys on their home turf, I've gotten an even better understanding of your perspective on the subject. Almost everyone agrees that the safe bet is to find a good woman in the Philippines and stay there with her. It gives a guy more control of the situation and keeps any of the bad Western influences and ways of thinking out of the equation. But sometimes, it's just not an option. Younger guys who are still working, or guys that have active revenue streams that require them to stay in the West, can't just drop everything and disappear to a foreign country, so they'll be tempted to bring a Filipina back home. More affluent, retired guys who are used to a modern life in the US might want to stay where they are. They might have a near-perfect life, and the only thing they're missing is the right partner. Maybe you're caring for elderly parents, or you've got kids who are still an essential part of your life, so staying in the West is a necessity. Or maybe you can afford to live in the West, but you wanted to try living in the unspoiled Philippines until you've actually been there a while and realized that you gave up a better life for a worse one, and you want to go home. But for whatever reason, there are legitimate situations where living in the Philippines just isn't the best option. You found the woman of your dreams, but she lives in a place you don't want to be. So what then? To many of you, the answer is simple. Just fly her on over. But bringing a Filipina to the West isn't like choosing a puppy from the pound and taking it home, or going online and ordering something from Amazon. It just doesn't work that way. And here's where I'm gonna be a little tough on those of you guys that don't get it. It drives me crazy when I talk to a foreigner that says, "Oh, I met this Filipina when I was on vacation and we spent an entire month in heaven. So now I'm back in Canada and I want to know the best way to bring her over and marry her." Dude, you're asking for trouble, begging for it. You couldn't possibly know near enough about this woman or her situation. And if you say you just have a good feeling about it, I'd say that's your fantasy talking. You have this perfect life all planned out in your head. You imagine you and your Filipina living a life of plenty back in the West, and things would be so much better for her that she'd be grateful till the end of time. But time is what you didn't take, because you're not looking at things realistically. You're letting your hopes and dreams direct your thinking, and your feelings for her are clouding your judgment. You're basically putting your fate in a roll of the dice. Now, some of you out there are just shaking your heads thinking that no one could be that stupid, but I'm here to tell you, it happens all the time. I hear this story at least once a week. A guy gets blinded about what feels like love, and all his reasoning powers go right out the window. Women can do it too, but in this case, a Filipina doesn't really have anything to lose. You do. Anytime you bring someone to a new country in a distant part of the world, they're going to be affected. And if you haven't prepared in advance, this could be the worst mistake of your life. So what are the dangers? And more importantly, what are the answers? Well, just think about when you go to the Philippines. Chances are, at first you're gonna hit a culture wall. Everything will be different. And you won't understand a lot of that's being said by the locals, even when they're speaking English. Our customs are different. The ebb and flow of life is different. And you'll be surprised by how many conveniences you no longer have. It can feel like someone just pulled the rug out from under you. Now, most of you are savvy enough to roll with the punches, and you'll be able to adjust pretty rapidly to your new surroundings. But that's not always the case with a Filipina coming to the West. In your mind, things are so much easier and more convenient that she's bound to love where you come from. But that doesn't always work that way. For instance, your traffic is so fast that it can be intimidating for a Filipina to drive here. But remember that most Filipinas don't even know how to drive a car. And in parts of the West like the US, Canada, or Australia, if you can't drive a car, you're not gonna get very far. And she'll be relying on you to take her everywhere, which can feel very isolating. She's used to hopping on a trike and getting wherever she needs to go. But things are so spread out in many Western countries that it's just no longer possible for her to get around without you. The food will be very different, and the things she's used to eating might be hard to get. Things like that don't seem to bother you Western guys as much because you're generally older, wiser, and able to assimilate to your surroundings. This is not always true with a Filipina, especially a younger woman who only knows a provincial life. Now, in my case, no problem. I'd fit in here just fine, I think, but that's because I'm already familiar with your culture. I'm fluent in English, and a lot of the people I run into seem to think I'm American. So I don't face nearly the level of culture shock that the average Filipino will. But most of you guys say, you don't want a woman like me. I've heard over and over again that I'm too westernized, and you want an innocent, traditional woman. But that's exactly the kind of woman who may not make it over there. I'm not saying they won't, of course. There are plenty of examples of young provincial Filipinas having very happy marriages and fulfilling lives in the West. But there are also many cases where it ultimately doesn't work because the same things you think you don't want are sometimes the qualities that make a cultural transplant more successful. Now, I've heard you say, get out of there, P, you'll be ruined by the culture. That's just not gonna happen, guys. I'm not an impressionable young woman who's easily influenced by the people around me. It's far more likely that I'll have the reverse effect and end up talking sense into the Western women I come across. That's why you need me here. But I admit, I'm not your average Filipina. Okay, so first, let's talk about the dangers other than a broken heart. Obviously, the main danger for a man in this situation is losing half his stuff, or more. If you're planning to bring a woman home to the West without first researching a prenup, then I pity you. All she has to do is make it to your home country, divorce you, take your assets, and start over with someone new. She might not have intended to do that from the beginning, but that doesn't diminish the risk. Consult a lawyer and find out how to draft the most ironclad prenup ever made of iron. Because in some states and some countries, prenups aren't worth the paper they're written on. Question your attorney. And if you live in a state where prenups are routinely overturned, then get married in a different state. Pick the one that's most advantageous to you. And make sure the woman you're bringing over has a separate lawyer to review the prenup before signing. Because if she doesn't have her own representation, chances are the prenup can be more easily voided. I know some of you guys think that prenups are offensive to a woman and show a lack of trust. But this is one case where it's absolutely necessary and non-negotiable. If you don't take my advice, then please don't contact me a year from now when she's left you with nothing but a mattress and some old DVDs, and she's off partying with her new American friends and selecting her next Chad. If you have a prenup, at least you've minimized the damage. But if she was a gold digger from the beginning, then heaven help you no matter where you are, the Philippines or the West. The next danger is one of expectations versus reality. Back in the Philippines, she might have looked at you and thought she found a diamond. But after being surrounded by a bunch of Western harpies and constantly told how much better she could have done in choosing a mate, suddenly you start to look more like broken glass that needs to be swept under the rug. Once again, this might not have been her intention, but the temptation to upgrade can be intense. especially if she's susceptible to outside influence. So how do you avoid these things? While the risk of bringing a Filipina to the West is definitely higher, it's not necessarily unmanageable if you know what to look for. The first thing to consider is your age, and the younger, the riskier. Generally speaking, younger women are more easily influenced by other voices, including disgruntled Filipinas living in the West, so-called friends who are unhappy themselves and want someone else to hang out with, and even the voice of a mom who has other motives besides her daughter's happiness. A woman in her 20s is still changing, and you don't know what that change is going to look like until it's too late. Are you the same man you were at 25? I seriously doubt it. And the same is true for your Filipina. Along with age comes maturity. Now, I can't put an exact age on it because everyone's different. I've seen some totally brainwashed and immature 40-year-olds, and I've come across some remarkably mature 18-year-olds. But the general rule still holds. The younger the Filipina, the higher the chance of having problems with immaturity. An immature woman will often run away from problems instead of fixing them. And when she sees problems in your relationship, she might run away from that too. There's no real test to see how mature someone is. It's just something you have to feel in your gut, like when you have a friend that you know would never screw you over. You can't prove it, and sometimes you get fooled. But experience tells you it's a person who deserves your trust, and trust takes time. There's no substitute for time except luck, which is something you just can't count on. So make sure you feel like you can count on your Filipina implicitly before inviting her to join you in the West. And that brings up another issue. Does she even want to come to your country? Or are you having to twist her arm to convince her? On the flip side, maybe it was her idea to move to the West, and perhaps she seems just a little too eager to make it over there, which could be an indication that her attraction to your country is more important than her attraction to you. Another thing to consider is her family situation. Just how attached is she to her mom and the rest of the clan? Did she live with them or next door to them, or was she more independent? The more attached the Filipina is to her family, the harder it might be for her to break loose and start a new life with you. If she's part of the family Borg collective, you're gonna have a harder time breaking her out of her hive mind thinking. She probably feels a strong duty to her clan, and taking her away to the West can cause feelings of anxiety because of her conditioning. She might feel guilty for leaving, a responsibility to provide for the folks back home, and be susceptible to a serious case of homesickness. The best barometer for predicting homesickness is her ability to adapt, which can be more of a personality trait. When she encounters something new, does she say, "Oh cool, let me try it"? Or is her reaction more like, "I've never seen that before, so I don't want anything to do with it because I might look foolish," or "It's not the way I do things and I don't want to change"? If it's the latter, then she's gonna have more problems with culture shock and maybe have thoughts of going home. To look at it from her perspective, she's been plopped down in a place where everything's strange. She's cut off from everything familiar, and she may not understand a lot of what's being said, which brings us to her fluency in English. The less she's comfortable with your language, the more isolation she's gonna feel. And she might even be self-conscious when she speaks it, which can cause her to seek out people she can talk to in her own language. Now, a lot of you guys seem to think that it's a good idea to introduce her to online Filipino groups in your country, or to look for Filipino communities so she can make friends with other people from her same background. It sounds like a good idea, but in my opinion, it's not. She needs to assimilate, and falling back on her old ways with her old people is not the way forward. It also runs the risk of infecting her with some dangerous ideas from people you've never met and can't monitor. And trust me, some of the advice that's given to newly arrived Filipinas will not be healthy for your relationship. I know this for a fact. So the more she can speak your language and the more she can adapt to your culture, the less likely she'll be to turn to other people to fill the gap. Now, these are all things you have to develop a spidey sense for, not something you can analyze like a math problem, so they require you to make a judgment call. I know it's tempting to adopt the philosophy of, oh, I'm sure it'll all work out. The important thing is that we both love each other, and love is all you need, right? Well, no, that's not right. You also need a healthy dose of skepticism, and maybe a good friend or two that can play devil's advocate and point out the problems that you might have missed, because when you're in love, you might have a tendency to downplay things you don't want to think about. So that's one of the reasons I made this video. Just think of me as your devil's advocate, trying to get you to look at the big picture as a whole. So to summarize, taking a young, immature Filipina who doesn't speak fluent English and has an unhealthy attachment to her family and bringing her back to the West is a recipe for disaster. It might still work, but the risk is just way too high. So what's my advice? If at all possible, go live in the Philippines for as long as you can. 6 months to a year would be great. And in that time, learn everything you can about this woman, her past, her motivations, her ability to adapt to your culture, and just how much pull her family has, especially her mom. Is your mom a simple, humble woman? Or is she preoccupied with status and money? You'd be surprised how much influence a mom can have in my culture. And even if her daughter's on the other side of the world, she can pull strings behind the scenes and give advice you'll never even know about. These are all things you have to know, or at least have a good idea about, before the words marriage or relocation ever cross your mind. Now, if you happen to be one of those guys I mentioned at the beginning, who just can't make it to the Philippines for an extended period, then you're in the higher risk group and you're basically flying blind. Do everything you can to address the points I raised, and with the proper legal precautions in place, at least you won't suffer a devastating blow to your finances if things don't work out, and may luck be on your side. So back to the original question. Have my views changed on bringing a Filipina back to the West? Well, to be honest, I still see the same problems and risks, but I've talked to many women from my country who've successfully made the transition and don't seem to be affected in a negative way. They have strong marriages and strong opinions about what it means to be a good wife and partner. So I know that coming to America is not an automatic deal breaker. It just introduces another layer of risk. Now, I'm sure I'll get hundreds of comments saying, "Don't bring a Filipina to the West, it'll ruin her." And I'll be getting plenty of other comments saying, "What's the big deal? I brought my Filipina here 10 years ago and we've never been happier." Well, you're both right and both wrong. There is no one-size-fits-all rule. It all depends on the individual's circumstances. And I hope I was able to help point out the things you need to watch out for in order to boost your chances of success. Well, that's it for this episode. And although my time in America is getting short, I'll be back in just a few days with another adventure from the USA. Till then, folks. If you think about it, I'm kind of like a teacher, providing knowledge about the Philippines twice a week. My course covers many different subjects, including the psychology of dealing with the local inhabitants, the mathematics of constructing a workable budget, and even biology with the sometimes bizarre mating habits of the Filipina. All I ask for this higher education is that you subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you're never late for class, and check out my Patreon page for extra content and exclusive features. And while you're waiting for your next lesson, it might be a good idea to study the other course material, because after grading your last exam, I'm afraid I'm gonna need you to stay after class for a little cramming session. Are you ready?